My name is Christina Pastori and I'm one of the counsellors from the University of Western Sydney. I'm going to be giving you a brief on perfectionism, procrastination and managing time. Now, perfectionism is when people set unrealistic high standards on themselves and on others, and they're emotionally troubled by such unrealistic demands. There are generally a couple of ways of looking at perfectionism. These are adaptive and maladaptive. Now, both these forms of perfectionism have high standards, but it's the motivation behind these standards that sets them apart. So, adaptive perfectionism is when people set high standards, but they are realistically high standards. So for example, you might have somebody that might say, I'd like to get 90% in my thesis, and they receive 80%. More often than not, these people have a flexible approach, and most of all, they don't judge themselves in a negative manner for not having received 90% as opposed to 80%. They accept mistakes and can learn from the mistakes, and that's another defining factor, that life is a learning process. They are accepting of suggestions and they embrace them, and they don't evaluate themselves harshly as being failures. Mostly, people with adaptive perfectionism are able to enjoy life. Now, people who have maladaptive perfectionism are people who set unrealistic high standards, and they're quite inflexible in their approach. So generally, these people don't enjoy life too much because they're often feeling like failures. They are often believing that they are being judged negatively by others. For example, when they're handing in some work to supervisors, they might be expecting some praise for what they did instead of suggestions that supervisors often provide. And they might judge themselves harshly as a result. So instead of seeing suggestions as constructive criticism and how they can change the paper and or accept the challenge, they give themselves a harsh time and critically evaluate themselves. Now, maladaptive perfectionists are consumed usually with fear of making mistakes. And often these are the people that will procrastinate, fantasizing that if they leave the task till a later date, they can do it perfectly. They can do it as a one-off and have a perfect paper provided. Now, that's not reality-based. So, being a postgraduate student, it's a good idea to set high standards. It's a good idea to have high standards. But the idea is to turn the maladaptive high standards into adaptive forms of perfectionism. Some strategies to turning maladaptive forms of perfectionism into adaptive forms could be having a change of mindset. So rather than thinking being perfect and living life trying to prove yourself as being perfect or highly intelligent or highly capable, try to approach life as though it's an avenue for learning. That usually lessens the pressure, and you might derive some enjoyment from life as opposed to putting pressure on yourself, procrastinating and making it hard for yourself and others as well. So another point is to accept mistakes. So develop papers that are not perfect from the word go. See papers as a work in progress. View suggestions as ways of challenging your comfort zone and embrace the challenge. Another aspect is to develop a sense of personal best. So instead of competing or comparing yourself to other people, it's a good idea to just develop that personal best. Develop ways of saying, well, in what way have I improved from, say, a few months ago? Or how was this year's conference presentation in terms of the paper that I delivered better in comparison to the paper that I delivered 6 months ago or even a year ago? In what way did I improve? Maybe some ways you didn't, but maybe some ways you did. So focus in on that. Think about providing good enough work rather than no work at all, or asking for extensions. Asking for extensions lengthens the agony overwriting a paper. So sometimes it's better to speed up the process and provide a good enough paper rather than no work at all. Maladaptive perfectionism is an anxiety-based response. You do need to treat it as an anxiety by developing or learning strategies to face your fear. Now, you might very well be able to do that on your own, or you may wish to consult a professional such as a counsellor or a psychologist. One aspect that postgraduate students face is that of procrastination. Procrastination is very common amongst the student population group, be it undergraduate or postgraduate or at any level. You might even find it with academic staff. Now, the thing is, it's very important to start realising your procrastination style. So, when you realise that you're not making progress and you start to wonder, what might be happening? Could this be that I'm procrastinating? You need to start thinking, well, what level of procrastination might be taking place? Procrastination can happen for lots of reasons. It could be that because of perfectionism, that there is a fear of making mistakes or fearing criticism from others. Or it could be that there's too much to study and you're not knowing where to start, feeling overwhelmed. You could be procrastinating because you're bored of study, or even you may be lacking motivation.